I'm gonna say something that I'm not allowed to say.
I am the greatest.
Alhamdulillah, tomorrow night I'm gonna smash your boy, guys. I'm gonna smash your boy.
Those people that are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that actually do.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to the Monsters and Men podcast, where we study monsters and where we study men. John D. Rockefeller, Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, Nelson Mandela, Steve Jobs, Jerry Seinfeld, and many, many more. Are these monsters or are these men? And what can we learn from them? Well, keep listening to this podcast and maybe you'll find out. My name is CN. I will be your guide. Let us begin. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? I hope you guys are good. Welcome to the Monsters and Men podcast. My name is CN, as always, because it would be weird if somebody replaced me. Yeah, that would be really weird. Anyway, so for this mini episode, we will be talking about Jerry Seinfeld. Now, who is Jerry Seinfeld? Jerry Seinfeld is a comedian, an actor, a writer, a producer, and he is the creator of the mega hit sitcom Seinfeld. Now, for those of you that don't know, Seinfeld was a sitcom that began around the late 1980s and ended in the late 1990s, from like 1989 to like 1998. And just to give you guys an idea of how big this show was when it came out, dude, like at its peak, Seinfeld averaged around 30 million viewers per episode during its later seasons. And this was in the 90s, man. So if you take those numbers, because I researched them, right? And I compared them to the Game of Thrones numbers. So if you take a look at like the Game of Thrones season 8, at their peak, I think they got around 17.8 million like viewers like at their peak, which is insane. But like this was like a handful of years ago, and then this is like Seinfeld. Obviously, this is probably like apples to oranges in terms of like streaming and HBO and network television. It's a whole thing. But okay, back to Seinfeld. Now, the series finale was watched by, give or take, 76 million people. This is just in the United States. And in 1998, Seinfeld was syndicated in a huge deal worth $1.7 billion. Now, this deal granted the rights to air reruns of the show on multiple networks across the globe. In 2015, Hulu bought the rights to stream Seinfeld exclusively on their platform. And in 2019, Netflix got the rights to stream it globally for about 5 years. It cost them around $500 million. And as far as I'm concerned, Netflix felt like, I don't know, maybe they felt like it was a bargain, but at the end of the day, they felt like it was worth it at the time. And finally, Seinfeld has been syndicated to over 70 countries worldwide, reaching millions of people around the world. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is who Jerry Seinfeld is. Jerry Seinfeld is an interesting man in that he's done so much and he works so hard, and he's such a character as far as like comedy is concerned, you know? And Seinfeld is such an iconic show, just such an iconic presence, and he's got such an iconic way of like kind of doing things, if that makes sense. Okay, so I'm gonna tell a couple Jerry Seinfeld stories. So the first few Seinfeld stories come from his interview with the Harvard Business Review. And so just to give you guys some context, right? So the Harvard Business Review is basically, if you know what Harvard is, you probably know what the Harvard Business Review is to some degree, or you can kind of like figure it out basically. It's just like a media arm of like Harvard, I think, actually. I didn't actually look that up. I should probably look that up actually, just to kind of make sure that's true. Anyway, just to give you guys some context, a bunch of years after the Seinfeld sitcom, Jerry Seinfeld created a kind of talk show called Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. It literally is just that. Comedians in cars getting coffee, where he invites a comedian, they take a drive and just talk shop. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful as far as like comedy is concerned. Anyway, the first question from the Harvard Business Review was this: how did comedians in cars originate? And then so this is like Seinfeld's answer. It's very important to know what you don't like. A big part of innovation is saying, you know what I'm really sick of? For me, that was talk shows where music plays, somebody walks out to a desk, shakes hands with the host and sits down. How are you? You look great. I'm also sick of people who are really there to sell their show or product. What am I really sick of is where innovation begins? And I love that question so much because it is a question that kind of prompts innovation in a really cool way. Like, what am I sick of? What am I sick of? And what I love about this question is that this is, in effect, the fundamental question of entrepreneurship. Like I mentioned this on episode 0.1 with Steve Jobs. And just the idea that you can look at the world and see, okay, what is something that I want in the world that does not exist today, but I want it to exist? What am I sick of? What functions in a very specific way that I don't like, that I would like to change? And just the idea... Just the idea that he looked at talk shows, he looked at because like some of these things seem incredibly fake, you know, a bunch of fake laughs, a bunch of like this and that. And it's like, it's these 6-minute, you know, sound bites and stuff. And it's like, it isn't like a legitimate thing. That's like something that like Joe Rogan talks about like immensely is the beauty of like podcasting, how you can have like these really proper, like long form conversations because they feel much more intentional. They feel much more authentic. And that kind of gets lost as far as like talk shows are concerned. And so it's beautiful that like when he thought about like comedians in cars getting coffee, like he wanted to kind of bring back that authenticity back into things. Okay. The second question. So the second question, also just to give you guys a little bit of background, Seinfeld ran from 1989 to like around 1998 and it ended season 9, and Seinfeld, the show was not canceled. He decided himself, okay, we're done. No more Seinfeld episodes. No more Seinfeld episodes. And there were multiple reasons for why like the Seinfeld show ended, but like the main reason, like I wish I could talk about it for this episode, but I think there's just so much on Jerry Seinfeld here that I think I'm gonna save it for like the main episode. One of the reasons that he wanted to end the show, like for one, like you'll hear in the question, it was like a burnout thing, but also for two, that it's important that shows don't go on for too long. It's always important to just leave them wanting more, you know? And so let me just read the question. So you and Larry David. Larry David is another comedian, writer, beautiful man, who created Curb Your Enthusiasm. Anyway, so you and Larry David wrote Seinfeld together without a traditional writer's room, and burnout was one of the reasons you stopped. Was there a more sustainable way to do it? Could McKinsey or someone have helped you find a better model? And then so Seinfeld responds, who's McKinsey? And then the guy responds, it's a consulting firm. And then he says, well, are they funny? And then he says, no. Then I don't want them. If you're efficient, you're doing it the wrong way. The right way is the hard way. The show was successful because I micromanaged it. Every word, every line, every take, every edit, every casting, that's my way of life. And what I like about this is that like this is a very like hardball Steve Jobs-esque way of doing things, where it's like, hey, my way or the highway. And this is kind of where like the monster, I guess, aspect of Jerry Seinfeld kind of like comes up, where there's this fixation on like perfection and micromanaging and making sure everything kind of works out properly. But like one thing I love about this is that it reminds me of Steve Jobs, in that Steve Jobs cared so much about the product that he wanted to make sure that everything ended up the way it needed to be. The way that it needed to be, the way that it had to be. Let me read you like a quote from the Steve Jobs biography. The older I get, the more I see how motivations matter. The Zune was crappy because the people at Microsoft don't really love music or art the way that we do. We won because we personally love music. We made the iPod for ourselves, and when you're doing something for yourself or your best friend or family, you're not going to cheese out. If you don't love something, you're not going to go the extra mile, work the extra weekend, challenge the status quo as much. What I love about this is that it really illustrates, like in a different way, that what Seinfeld was essentially saying. So the reason Seinfeld was so micromanagey, the reason he was so really tough to work with, was that he really cared about the product. He really cared about the show. He really wanted to make sure that it came out the way that it needed to come out. He wanted to make sure that it was perfect. And I see that. And I love that. And that is definitely like a hallmark of like perfectionists to like some degree, because we care so much about the product that we want it to come out the way that we want it to. Okay, next thing, let's just touch on Seinfeld's writing process, because remember that Seinfeld is a comedian. So because he's a comedian, he is writing jokes like it's insane. We're gonna get into like another story like later on about how he's always on, like he's always just thinking about comedy, which is really cool. And so cool. This is kind of like his writing process. This is kind of like a quote that he did. That is, I got this from a New York Times article, I think. Yeah. Okay, so this is Seinfeld. I still have a writing session every day. It's another thing that organizes your mind. The coffee goes here, the pad goes there, the notes go here. My writing technique is just, you can't do anything else. You don't have to write, but you can't do anything else. So he just kind of sits there with his pad there, his notepad, his notes and everything. And you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything. But since you're there, you might as well just write. And it can't be this agonizing, grueling process, and he was on the Tim Ferriss podcast, and Tim asked him about this. He read this exact quote, and then Tim said, well, obviously like your writing process has kind of changed and evolved over like the past, like I don't say 10 years. How has that changed? And he was like, yeah, no, that actually isn't true. It hasn't changed. It's pretty much remained exactly the same. I think he even told this to like Howard Stern, that this is pretty much what he does. Like this is what he's been doing since his 20s. You just kind of sit down and you write. You just kind of sit down with a notepad and you bleed, and you write those jokes. And to kind of get into like something else, because when he was on the Howard Stern podcast, Howard Stern asked him questions about like how he comes up with his jokes, how he comes up with his comedy. And one of the things that Jerry kind of mentions is that like if he's just somewhere, like if he's in like a Chinese restaurant or something, and then he just notices like the chopsticks or something, like in his mind, Jerry Seinfeld is always thinking about comedy. He's always just on comedy at every single point. At every single point in time, he's always on comedy. He's always just trying to figure out like, what is the funny angle here? What is the weird like observation here? What is this? What is that? What is that? And then every now and then he'll take out his yellow legal pad. He'll just write down like these observations, and it'll be interesting and funny. And then he'll just kind of take that, and then just when he's writing his sessions, he'll be editing this, editing that, trying to get it down word for word. And it's this interesting process, this iterative process of over and over and over. But like he is always on. There was never a time when he's not thinking about comedy. And what's interesting about this is that like it's so cool. Like it's so cool because Howard Stern hears this, right? Howard Stern hears this and is like, wait, that sounds like torture, man. And to some degree, like to some degree, like Jerry agrees, and I would agree as well. Like that sounds like torture, but like it begs the question of like, what is the torture that you would happily endure? Like, what is the torture that you would happily endure? And that is a very interesting question of like, what kind of suffering? Like when it comes to going to the gym, when it comes to getting married, like when it comes to having kids, these things are not easy things, but there's a suffering inside. Like these things are a kind of suffering, but with it, like they bring this freaking beautiful, like this beautiful like purpose and this beautiful fulfillment that kind of comes with them. So here's a quote from Sam Altman. He's the OpenAI guy. It is hard to be wildly successful at anything you aren't obsessed with. And then again, this is like Paul Graham as well. It's hard to do a really good job on anything you don't think about in the shower. It's hard to do a really good job on anything you don't think about in the shower. And so like it's just this idea of like being turned on, being on at every single point in time. Is it the healthiest? Probably not, but like there's something about this that kind of like inspires or like it sets the groundwork for a kind of like outsized return as far as like success is concerned, which is really kind of interesting to think about. And to kind of add on to this idea of being always on, there's this thing that Steve Jobs says. Yo, geez, I feel like I've quoted Steve Jobs so much. Listen, I love Steve Jobs. Dude's amazing. I love Steve Jobs. And so this is what Steve Jobs said about like kind of like having a career, of like being like a career person. So the quote goes like this. Don't be a career. The enemy of most dreams and intuition, and one of the most dangerous and stifling concepts ever invented by humans is the career. A career is a concept for how one is supposed to progress through stages during the training for and practicing of your working life. There are some big problems here. First and foremost is the notion that your work is different and separate from the rest of your life. If you are passionate about your life and your work, this can't be so. They will become more or less one. This is a much better way to live one's life. The risk factor or quotient goes down as you encounter the real world. Many people find what they believe to be safe harbors, lawyers and accountants, only to wake up 10 or 15 years later and discover the price they paid. Make your avocation your vocation. Make what you love your work. And so when Howard Stern speaks to Jerry Seinfeld and says, "Hey, this sounds like torture, man. This sounds freaking terrible. Like, why are you doing this? What is going on?" Jerry Seinfeld just looks at him and is like, "Hey, man, it is important to pick the torture that you can be proud of, that you can sustain. You know, what is the torture that you would happily endure?" And this is a good question. And it's something that investor and entrepreneur and just all around philosophical guide Naval Ravikant says, is that what feels like play to you but looks like work to others. So for other people, being always on and just having jokes in your head over and over again, that sounds like work and that sounds like torture. But for Jerry, this is his life. This is what he loves. This is what he enjoys. This is the kind of torture that he wants no other kind of torture other than this. This is the torture that he's willing to sustain and just stay with his entire life, and he loves it. So what is the torture that you would be proud? Is it making music? Is it dancing? Is it writing? Is it this? Is it that? What is your torture? And then finally, there's one story, one of the stories that I really, really love, by Jerry Seinfeld. So what's happening is that Jerry is it's so cool. Jerry is basically in the back of a club, basically, right? And he's talking to this comedian. It's so cool. And this comedian here is talking to him, is saying, "Man, it's been 10 years and I'm struggling to make it, to quote unquote make it as a comedian." He's he's approaching his 30s, he's afraid that he's taking the wrong path and all these different things. But Jerry looks at him and is like, no. This isn't this comedy. Comedy is a very special thing. This isn't about making it. Comedy is a very special thing. It's something that is important to have passion about. Something that is important that you need to be it's so cool. It's so cool. Because there's this video and it's so cool. He points at the stage. It's this is such a special thing. This has nothing to do with making it. Making it. And the guy looks at him and asks, okay, the other comedian asks Jerry, but did you ever stop and compare your life? Compare, because this guy, he sees his friends and they're all they're making a bunch of money on Wall Street, they're moving up, they're getting married, they're having kids, getting houses, but he's just kind of And then so Jerry just makes his face ugh, what are you talking about, man? It's let me tell you a story. It's this is my favorite. So this is what Jerry says. He just wants to tell this guy a story. So let me tell you a story. This is my favorite story about show business. Glenn Miller's orchestra is doing a gig. They can't land the plane because it's winter, a snowy night. They have to land in this field and walk to the gig. They are dressed in their suits. They are carrying their instruments. They are walking through the snow. It's wet and slushy. And in the distance, they see this little house. They go up to the house and look in the window. Inside, they see this family. There's a guy and his wife. She's beautiful. There's 2 kids. And they're all sitting around the table. They're smiling. They're laughing. There's a fire in the fireplace. These guys are standing there in their suits. They're wet and shivering, holding their instruments. And they're watching this incredible Norman Rockwell scene. And one guy turns to another guy and goes, "How do people live like that? How do people live like that?" And then Jerry says, "That's what it's about." What is the pain, the suffering that you would happily endure? It is of the utmost importance that wherever you are, that is the place where you want to be. That I am here recording a podcast or recording a song or writing a book or writing an article, and I'm here because I want to be here. I don't want to be anywhere else. I love the climb, that I love, I wouldn't call it the hustle, but that I love the hustle, that I love the fight, that, this thing for its own sake that just for its own sake, it is beautiful in its own way, that you don't need to motivate it with anything else. You don't need to make it something that Chris Williamson. I keep forgetting. Jeez, sometimes I call him Chris Williams. So something that Chris Williamson kind of taught me. He had a Q&A on his podcast a couple of months ago, and one of the questions that he was asked is like about growing like a podcast and stuff. And yeah, and his answer surprised me because it struck a nerve in the best way, in that he said something, and he said it so casually, as if it was nothing, but it was everything, when he said that most people want an audience like right now, and it's very difficult to get an audience right now. However, it's very easy to get an audience in 6 years from now. And so if you kind of just don't stop, then these things kind of figure themselves out. Especially if you're self-motivated, especially if you love this, especially if you would not rather be anywhere else except here. I think it is of the utmost importance to find passions like that. To find passions where this is where I want to be. This is what I want to do with every single fiber of my being. This is who I am, and this is who I want to be. To do things for the sake of doing them. Just for their own sake. I'm here where the work is the reward. Now that is true happiness. That is true satisfaction. That is true purpose. That is absolutely gorgeous. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this episode starring Jerry Seinfeld. And yeah, I guess I'll see you guys next week. And until then, do impossible things. Have a good day.